So we're going to start this video with a universally shared experience, right? It's the paradox with outreach. You've got your laptop ready, you've got your outreach ready, whether it's email or a LinkedIn message, right? The whole system is ready to go. And intellectually, you know that dialing the number or sending that email is the one thing that will move the revenue right now. But yet every single physical and mental impulse in your body just rebels, right? Your focus just evaporates. You have this urgent need to reorganize your book bar for the 10th time today, or you fall down the social media rabbit hole, just for 5 minutes for inspiration. It's the ultimate sabotage. And it's this really profound, internal conflict where the activity for your growth is the one you fight the hardest to avoid, right? And a lot of people, they look at this pattern and they just label it like, oh, I'm just being lazy or I'm procrastinating. But frankly, those are very surface level. They're superficial diagnoses. They're symptoms and they're not the cause. When you're consistently and just so powerfully unable to execute a known business activity like outreach, the pain isn't caused by the activity itself. It's caused by an unconscious fear, a psychological barrier, a fear of what happens if it fails, or also what happens if it succeeds, right? So today I want to hunt for those specific, often highly irrational fears, because once you can drag those fears out of the shadows and actually name them, then the psychological framework shifts, right? And suddenly making progress and outreach becomes not only easier, but automatic. Let me be clear though, this isn't just for the solopreneur or the beginner. It applies universally. Like I've seen established agency owners, business owners completely stall because these, fears act as a ceiling. They prevent them from scaling aggressively. If you're struggling to achieve sustainable growth, then these fears absolutely have to be recognized and dismantled. So Carl Jung's take on this is just perfect for this, right? And he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will completely rule your life and you will call it fate. Let's think about how many entrepreneurs think about their business's stagnation, that people say, oh, my niche is just too saturated right now. And they externalize the failure. They're looking at the lack of growth and they categorize it as this external uncontrollable fate or cosmic forces, completely missing the fact that the primary fix is sitting right between their ears, right? And the truth is that the mind seeks an external cause just to protect the ego. So if you don't make these unconscious biases conscious, then it will sabotage your own business. We want every single part of ourselves to be aligned, not 50% of us moving forward and 50% of us wanting to move back. We need every single part of us moving forward and aligned towards the same goal, right? But the good news is that these fears, they're not clinical phobias. You don't have some pathological fear of opening an email. Because these fears are rational, they are kind of rational, just bringing these irrational fears into the light is frequently, enough to break these fears, right? The moment these fears are dragged into conscious light, then we can start to break them down. So the first category is the standard, what happens if it goes wrong. Before we go into this specific one, I knew this business owner and he was doing very well. He was given a proven outreach system. He executed it correctly. And after just 2 weeks of sending emails, he received 12 to 15 positive replies in his inbox, right? This is beyond successful. This is undeniable proof that the system works. He had money sitting there in his inbox, but he convinced himself that the system wasn't working, right? Despite 15 positive responses, he failed to reply to any single one of his prospects and he stopped outreach altogether. He just said, the method, it wasn't right for him. And that was the textbook definition of an unconscious fear. His mind picked the status quo, which is no clients, right? So he stopped because success for him was the larger psychological threat. His entire perception of reality was completely skewed by an unseen, unconscious fear. But first, we have to distinguish the difference between a genuine unconscious fear and like burnout or being bad at organization. And it's an important distinction to make, but the key factor here is the timing of the adversion. If it's disorganization, then you'll struggle with multiple tasks. And if it's burnout, then you'll struggle with everything. But with these, it's the opposite, right? The moment there's a positive result, there's a retreat from that and our unconscious fears rear their heads again because the unconscious thinks, oh no, I have to go to the next step. And the next step is the fear. So the fear isn't the work itself, it's the outcome of that work, right? So fear number one is rejection and judgment. And this is what we call the ego. Because when we really deconstruct rejection, people people are terrified that someone will think poorly of them or judge them negatively. But when someone replies negatively to your email or hangs up the phone, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting the business proposal. And that's a critical point. If you take that negative response on a very deeply emotional level, then it's a clear sign that you're emotionally entangled with your business. Like your self-worth has become entangled with your business. And if your ego becomes involved, then you become fragile. And business requires resilience. And resilience isn't possible if every no feels like a punch to your own identity, right? So there has to be a separation between you and your business. This is crucial. I see this with people's social media profiles. You need that separation between you and your business. Now, when a prospect sends a scathing reply and tells you to fuck off, right? They're not telling you, the person, to do that. They're telling the business proposal or the entity to do that, right? And that's a very powerful reframe, which allows you to objectively, view the feedback. Was the offer wrong? Was the timing bad? Was the message wrong? Like, you can do all of that without having an emotional crisis about your self-worth, right? That separation allows you to maintain that resilience. They're just reacting to a piece of text on the screen or a video. So the ego barrier is lowered by separating ourselves from the business, right? But if we dig deeper into the judgment aspect, most people aren't just afraid of no, they're afraid of the prospect thinking they're an amateur or a spammer or something. And this is where we need to introduce the mirror mental model. And this is one of the biggest unlocks for me. And it's a critical thinking tool which connects our internal behavior to our external fear. And it's really simple, but it's devastatingly accurate, because our intense fear of being judged during outreach is the fact that we intensely judge others with our outreach, right? Our brain constantly collects data, running simulations to predict future outcomes. So if you think about your own experience, we've all received generic mass emails from scraped lists. Like, what's your immediate response to that? It's brutal, right? This is a crappy business. I bet they suck at what they do. Those internal private thoughts, that contempt, that becomes the data. Those become data points. Your brain collects this internal data, your own profound negative judgments, and then it uses that as the most likely response that you'll receive when you send your own outreach. So your mind is trying to protect you from that scorn. It literally holds a mirror up to your own perceptions and then reflects that onto the whole world. It's literally saying, if you judge others, you will be judged. I've collected 100 data points, 100 emails, and 95% of them I hated. So that's what's going to be the same for us, right? Our limbic system, it screams danger, massive pain, public judgment. And that negative response is entirely rational from our brain's perspective. It's trying to save you from an emotional injury. Therefore, the key isn't to write a better script, even though that will help. It will be to change our own perception to the behavioral outreach. And so this is where we need to invert things. These are some actionable actions. So just being aware of it isn't enough. So we need to actually retrain our brain. So the inversion technique requires massive, conscious and consistent shifts in our perspective for sustained periods of time. So for the next 30 days, we need to be committed to having a positive, appreciative attitude to people reaching out to us. So we need to actively retrain our brain to view it as a positive experience, right? So instead of just deleting a spammy email with a sigh of annoyance and an eye roll, we need to engage at least mentally with respect, right? Even if it's spam, the mental shift is what's important. So if it's good cold outreach, then you should try and send a response. I try to send responses to good outreach with, a positive response. I appreciate you reaching out. I'm going to pass right now. My time is valuable. I appreciate you thinking of me and reaching out. Professional, it's fun, but it's positive, right? And it takes 30 seconds. So not to every email, but to good ones, right? And it reframes the whole interaction in your own mind as well. So demonstrating respect to people, doing the same thing we're doing, and we're retraining our own limbic system doing that, right? So we have stronger data points of approval and respect. So our brain starts to build a different, association with outreach, not with, pain, but with acceptance and respect. Like, we need to fight years of accumulated judgment. Like, you have to commit to this for a minimum of 30 days until that negative association starts to fade. The moment you start to associate sending outreach with receiving positive approval, then you've flipped the switch in your brain, right? And the reward of that is unlocking your own ability to act. It connects your internal psychology to your external business results, where the capacity to act isn't limited by your own mentality. So failure, rejection, and judgment that we've kind of handled those. But the next is the most dangerous because they're hidden. They're all related with success. This is the what if it actually works category, right? You have the urge to literally leave the room and start scrolling endlessly or snacking because our mind is trying to cope with the future outcome. And the first is the fear of sales. This is a common hurdle for sure, but let's examine the underlying psychological conflict here. And it's very simple. The individual, the person, they want the outreach to work, but the outcome of outreach, getting that positive reply, it isn't money, it's a commitment to a sales call or a discovery call or a freebie. That sales environment is what triggers the limbic system. It could be a fear of objection handling or, feeling an environment of confrontation or just recalling past experiences or people being aggressive while selling. So the nervous system and the limbic system, that primal ancient part of the brain which governs fight, flight or freeze, it registers the sales call as being confrontational, scary or nerve-wracking, right? So our limbic system is basically running a predictive model. It sees our booked sales call and then it immediately fast forwards to that negative environment. And our brain, which is incredibly efficient at protecting us from dangerous environments, registers the fact and understands that outreach leads to sales calls. So the safest thing to do is just to avoid outreach. This is where the intelligent part comes in, because our brain then diverts us from doing the activity that we think we want consciously, but subconsciously we don't, right? Very intelligent at doing that. Our brain will divert us to doing anything else, cleaning the house or checking our email for the 100th time, all to prevent us from taking that first step. So the fear isn't of the immediate action, it's of the inevitable consequences of the action, right? It's a whole chain of effects. So appointments lead to sales, sales lead to service delivery, etc. And the easiest point to break that chain is at the beginning. And so that brings us to the next one, which is the fear of service delivery. And this one is far more insidious than sales, because you might actually be good at sales, but the moment people contemplate successful sales, then that's when the fear comes in. There's a confidence gap. And you might have noticed this with e-commerce, right? After the iOS 14 update, that one caused a huge psychological shift. And it like perfectly illustrated an external market factor changing, people's outreach. The ad targeting and everything became a lot more risky and changed overnight. And so there was a collective widespread slump in outreach motivation. And it wasn't that their email scripts just stopped working or they forgot how to sell. They were paralyzed by the new complexity of, the market, right? They were afraid of getting clients, and it required them to deal with this immense, complex and potentially unsolvable problem. They avoided the prospect of success because it was higher stakes, right? Higher stakes, higher anxiety. So when the market changed, the environment changed, the fear of failing a client or having a bad reputation, it forced their brains to avoid the prospect of having to encounter that, right? If you're going to go skydiving, then you're going to have to sign the waiver. And signing the waiver isn't scary. That's not the scary part, right? Signing the waiver is like sending an email or sending a DM or clicking a button. Your brain is terrified of what signing that waiver means you have to do next, which is make that jump, right? The sales call or the service delivery. So that the act of outreach becomes the trigger for this deep anxiety of the future outcome, right? If you send the outreach, you might have to do the sales call. If you do the sales call, then you might have to navigate complex service delivery. And the fear of failure in that initial marketing phase means it stops from the get-go. And that brings us to the next and most profound hurdle, which is the fear of growth itself, right? And this is deeper than just fearing a sales call or service delivery. This is the fear of becoming a different person altogether, right? Fundamentally changing as a person. And this one is truly primal. It's lodged very deep in our limbic system. And so, the current state, even if it's characterized by having no clients or no money, it's defined by one factor, which is safety, right? Our limbic system, which is the most ancient reptilian part of our brain, it drives most of our moment-to-moment decisions. And its priority is safety and comfort, because it knows that in our current mode of operation, our current stress levels, even if we are struggling, at the moment financially or whatever, we're not going to die. It knows that you're not going to die. So the limbic system is essentially calculating known unhappiness is better than unknown potential joy. Growth by definition means future change. And that change is instantly registered by our limbic system as, potential danger. So if we look at it through like a hunter-gatherer model, we have our known territory, right? This is order. This is safe. This is the area around the village fire, safe, predictable. And this is our current behavior, right? It's our current self. And it might feel dull, it might feel depressing, but it's predictable and it's safe, right? And we're content here because that's where all the threats are known. But if we want to get new resources and find the big game, the new treasure, we have to venture out into chaos, out into discomfort. And that's where all the new possibilities are. But that's also where the danger is. And so outreach is stepping out of that known territory. But it makes sense that our brain, thinks about it this way, because from an evolutionary perspective, I guess, those children who stepped away from the campfire into the darkness and wasn't afraid of potential monsters in the dark, they were the ones that were eaten by the jaguars and the lions and tigers. So they were removed from the gene pool. Those brave genes, those brave kids, they're no longer with us, and we don't get their genes. So we have to force our genes to act in that way and unlock ancient ancestor spirits. And we have to unlock that part of ourselves consciously, bringing the unconscious into the conscious. To get significant resources, to find the big game, the massive client, you have to venture into the unknown territory. Then that's where the wealth and new possibilities are, but that's also where the danger is perceived to be. And outreach is the first step into that territory. So outreach is fundamentally stepping out of our known territory, right? If that outreach succeeds, then it mandates a future that is structurally, different from our current circumstances. And it's just terrifying to the limbic system, because this is, it means shedding old safe habits and adopting new behaviors, which is dangerous, right? It's new. It demands that you become a different person. And this is terrifying to the limbic system, right? It means shedding old habits and adopting new ones, right? So if we get into the specifics of the actual identity change, there's a couple aspects, which trigger the actual fear of change we're trying to scale, and they're profoundly personal. The first is the fear of losing control, right? As the operator of a small business or as a solopreneur, you're in control, you touch everything. But scaling means you're going to have to hire people and lose control. And so the limbic system sees leverage as losing control. The unknown territory is relying on someone else who might break everything. And then there's the fear of increased stress, increased liability. So trying to scale means more tax, more legal exposure, more complexity, more staff. The level of ambient stress is higher. And the limbic system monitored your current levels of stress. It thinks, okay, stay here. Don't increase your blood pressure. You're going to live longer, right? That's the way our brain sees it. But success and scale often means hiring and focusing on vision. And then there's identity, right? People often, identify with the hustle mentality, but success and scale often means adopting more of a managerial role, right? But they fear becoming the corporate kind of person or just changing from the person they currently are. So our brain literally prevents us from growing and developing. So procrastination is just a survival response. We need to overcome these ancient mechanisms that are out of date and against what we're trying to do. Discomfort in the correct direction. We need to get used to it. So we've looked at these 4 great unconscious fears: fear of rejection, judgment, service delivery, sales, growth, identity change. So what does this all mean? The issue preventing growth typically isn't the outreach method or the CRM. It's the specific fear of what happens if that succeeds. So that leads me to the most important part of this, okay? Don't use this knowledge as a reason to justify doing the outreach. The mind is a master of deception, all right? So don't think, okay, I'm afraid of sales. Now I need to spend 6 months reading every single sales book and practicing my pitch and fix my confidence. Or my service delivery confidence is low, so I need to spend the next 3 months fixing the whole entire system, fixing SOPs before I risk getting a client. That's self-sabotage, brilliantly disguised as productive, rational preparation, right? You're using the knowledge of the fear to rationalize procrastination, right? You're keeping yourself safe in the known territory. You've traded growth for books, zero progress. So don't do that. Make sure you don't do that. So the only way you will ever truly learn to handle sales calls or service delivery, you have to do the outreach. The confidence to deliver comes from delivery. The confidence of sales comes from selling, not from studying sales theory, right? The moment you get a client, you're forced to actually deliver. And without the pressure of that client, then the work just remains theoretical, safely tucked away in some corner of your mind. So there's no secret bullet or secret script or magic spell. It's literally facing the fear, right? You have to just face that fear, right? Having a goal to look that in the face, and then, telling yourself, I know you're trying to protect me, but we're not moving in that direction. We're going this way. That capacity, like a muscle, can only grow by moving that weight, right? You have to do the reps, and then the fear no longer becomes an issue. Same with all kind of fears. So fundamentally, it's about mindset, okay? So the ultimate success story isn't the client you land, or it's the person you become in achieving that client. The realization that you're afraid of success is the first and most vital step for achieving it. So if the most primal, ancient part of our brain is strictly designed to keep us in the known territory, a place where we're safe but often unhappy and unfulfilled, stagnant, how do we redefine the concept of success? We have to teach our brain that growth isn't a method of survival, but a method of thriving. But I hope you found that helpful. The 4 fears blocking growth and stopping outreach, which I see all the time. Make sure you don't trick yourself into believing one of these. But yeah, I hope you found that helpful. Thanks for watching. Any questions, let me know in the description. But thanks for watching. Take care.